Welcome to Lean Into Leadership, where we lead the conversation about anything and everything leadership related. On today's episode, Symantha Dattilo joins the show. Hey everybody, it's Brandon Skiles, and welcome to episode 7 of Lean Into Leadership. We got a great one planned for you today. Super awesome guest here, Sam. It's a pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Very good. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for being here. A little bit about you. Currently the assistant director of our volunteer center here at Central Michigan University. Hold 2 degrees from CMU.
Yes.
You love working with students and creating programming to help them lead and grow as people as well. So, before we jump into the specific content, I'd love for you to have the opportunity to kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, what you do, and why you do it.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm the assistant director in the volunteer center. I've held that role since April of 2019. Prior to that, I was a graduate assistant in the office for 2 years, first with alternative breaks and also with our mentoring programs. So previously the adoptive grandparent program and the lunch buddies program. Before that, I was an Alternative Breaks board member, so I've been involved with the Volunteer Center in some capacity since 2013. I got married during the pandemic.
Nice.
It was horrible, but great.
Congrats.
I've been with my partner for 14 years this year. We have a dog. His name is Enzo, and he's perfect.
Love that.
And I love to read. That's
Sweet.
pretty much it.
Awesome. The Alternative Breaks program, you're kind of leading that now, obviously.
Yeah.
Under your leadership, though, #1 in the nation for a moment there. That's super cool.
Yes.
So
#1 last year, and you get the scoop. We're #2 for this last year.
Okay. So we'll get back to #1, right?
Yes.
Next year?
Yeah.
Love that.
And Alma College beat us out. So now it's officially a rivalry.
Right.
Yeah.
Right down the road. So sweet.
Yeah.
Super great program, too. So students listening as well, maybe you want to touch upon Alternative Breaks a little bit for maybe the students that are kind of viewing.
Yeah, so Alternative Breaks is a program that is a part of a larger service network throughout the country that works with college students called Breakaway. And what it is an opportunity for college students to connect with nonprofits across the country and do week-long, weekend-long, and then day-long service experiences in communities outside their own, with the entire intent of taking everything you learn across the country and bringing that back home to wherever home might be for you to make a difference on a small scale.
Super cool. It's a great opportunity to get involved. A lot of students love it.
Yes.
Great leadership opportunities as well through college. So, again, awesome. If you're a student, again, attending maybe a university or institution that has that program, definitely jump in on one of those breaks, get involved. So, first question for you is, what kind of programming goes on in the Volunteer Center? You touched upon it a little bit, but what other programs available for students?
Yeah, so like I said, we have the Alternative Breaks program, which is our largest service opportunity right now through our office. We also offer the America Counts and Reads program, which is a tutoring program that partners college students with local elementary students to help them with their math and reading skills. So it's really, really awesome for education majors, but any student who's interested in getting some mentoring as a mentor type role can get partnered with a local elementary school student, but also work closely with the teachers in the school as well. And it's really designed to help the students who are kind of on the bubble, so who just need a little bit of extra attention, who need a little bit of extra mentorship, and our college students can help provide that for them. We also have the Central Civics program through our office, which is a civics education program. It is designed to help students learn how to have difficult conversation, to lean into controversy, and hard conversations, and not shy away from difficult dialogue, but also make sure that they feel fully informed when going to vote. We also have our Financial Wellness Collaborative, which really is housed through a website now called iGrad, which is the premier college student financial education tool in the country. And students at CMU can visit that for free at cmish.igrad.com. And it's basically like a BuzzFeed for your finances. It's got quizzes and simulators, and it helps students understand really, really basic stuff around budgeting, student loan repayment, but it's also about do you want to buy a car for the first time? How does that work? Are you graduating and looking to buy a house? how does that work? Or as simple as, I want to adopt a cat. What does the budget for adopting a cat look like? So it runs the gamut from day one of college through the rest of your life. And CMU students get to use that for free forever.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then our student food pantry, which you know because you worked in. And that is free for all CMU students. There are no eligibility requirements. There are zero financial requirements. If a student needs help, they just walk in the door. And we have shelf-stable products, produce, cleaning supplies, hygiene products, school supplies, anything a student might need to be able to be successful while in college. We give it out for free.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Tons to do in the volunteer center.
Yes,
really great
options.
Opportunities to get involved. Also, seek those resources if needed.
Yes.
And also get involved in service work, which is super awesome. So when did you kind of find your passion for working with students and doing the work that you're doing right now?
Yeah. So when I came to CMU for my undergraduate experience, my major was in public relations and my minor was in communication. And I knew immediately, based on my classwork and my internships, that I wanted to work with nonprofits. And so that's what I did for my entire undergrad experience. I think, like most people, I became more politically activated around 2015, 2016. And I saw a need in my community, and I thought I could make a difference, but I wanted to get some more education first. And so I sought my master's degree in political science, but I had to pick a concentration for my research. And based on my experiences with alternative breaks and serving in communities, my love for nonprofit work, I decided to focus on civic engagement. And from there, I got connected with Dr. Matt Johnson on campus, and he was doing some work around college student civic engagement. And from there, it just kind of broke open. I learned a lot about how college students, even after all the work we do to prepare them, leave college and are really, really, really bad at having difficult conversations around politics. Everybody is really bad at having difficult conversations around politics. That's the whole problem right now, right?
100%.
And I thought, maybe if we knew more, if the literature could be more up to date, if we could employ student development theory and combine that with political theory, we might be able to figure out how to better prepare college students to go out into the world and have difficult conversations, to better collaborate with their communities to solve problems. And so between that interest in my research and then getting an assistantship as a grad student in the volunteer center, it just worked. And I loved alternative breaks because I did it as a student. I went on 7 week-long breaks during my undergrad, and I loved it, and it changed my life. And when I had the opportunity to stay and help other students have that life-changing experience, I knew I needed to stick around, and so I did.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that story. I always hear it, like, it's always kind of the story we've kind of heard through other episodes is people that got involved during maybe their undergrad or maybe even that graduate school if they ended up doing that. Found their passions through ways maybe they didn't even necessarily know that were out there, but are now doing that work and working with others. And
when I graduated
difference.
College, I didn't know student affairs was a job. I didn't know anybody who worked at a college.
Same.
So, it's interesting now to know that
now you're in it.
People out here actually running the university other than the faculty, which again, I had no idea existed.
So it's fascinating too. You're gonna run for office one day? You thinking about it?
I thought about it. Yeah. I always thought I would maybe work in the State Department nationally. I was really interested in being a diplomat for a while, but I hate flying, so maybe the UN isn't for me. And if I did, I would start local and see what happens from there, because I think the most change can happen on the local level.
That's interesting.
Yeah. We'll see.
Governor maybe like 2034 then or something. We'll see. Yeah.
When Gretchen's done.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we talked about kind of the programming available in the volunteer center. How can students now get involved in those opportunities to develop kind of their leadership or find those leadership roles? Like maybe what are the specific opportunities within those programs in the volunteer center for that?
Yeah, so at CMU, we are an Engage Central campus. Students should all use Engage, not only for the volunteer center, but for other registered student organizations and getting involved with clubs related to their majors and fraternities and sororities that are related to their majors. But the biggest way volunteer-centered programming gets passed around, I think, is really just through word of mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to your RAs, talk to your inclusion assistants, ask your mentor, because I think specifically with volunteering and service-related work, those stories about why it made a difference to you, not just what the opportunity is really what makes the impact. To specifically hear how our students just got back from West Palm Beach and we're helping baby sea turtles find their way to the ocean, that makes a way better impact than me just posting an event for a student to sign up for, right? When you work with community, stories are what matters most, because it is the personal that makes the impact. Not what we're just posting on the internet.
Right.
So talk to your mentors, talk to your friends, and find out who the change makers in your community are.
That's cool. Do you ever I don't know if this has been done. It just popped in my head. Is there ever maybe an alternative break fair or an opportunity where students can tell those stories to other students that maybe are interested? Do you put an event on that?
No, that's a good idea. We do main stage, obviously.
Right.
And before each season sign up, we do an info night where students can kind of talk about it. But because it requires travel, most students, they want to know how much it costs, and they want to know how far they're driving. They find out they're driving, and that's always a barrier. I think nobody wants to sit in the car for 20 hours.
Right.
But yeah, that's a good idea. Something we should think about for sure.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So do leadership and service go hand in hand? And if so, why and how? Yeah.
So something that community leaders have been using for a really long time is called the ABCD approach, which is the asset-based community development approach. And that basically just says that communities know what they need. They do this work day in and day out. They know what it takes to solve those problems. It's just about resources, right? And so any social justice issue you can think of has a leader at the front, but that person can't do it alone, right? That resource piece is so significant. And that's where programs like alternative breaks come in, because the resource might just literally be bodies to help get a project done. Something we talk about is indirect service. And what that means is we used to send students to this domestic violence shelter in South Carolina, and students would sign up for the experience anticipating going to counseling sessions and talking one-on-one with survivors. And they would get down there, and the actual counselors would say, hey, you're not qualified to do that work, but what we really need from you is to help us organize this donation closet. Because if we are organizing the donation closet, we don't get to spend as much time with survivors, helping them find out what their next steps are going to be. And so that indirect service piece is really where student leadership comes into play, or just community leadership comes into play. It's all about knowing what each individual's asset is and going with that approach. So for the counselors, their asset is their training. For students volunteering, their asset is that there are 10 of them down there. They've got 20 sets of hands, right? And they can go to town on a donation closet and alleviate that work so that the organization can get back to doing what it does best. And so I think with service and leadership, it's really just knowing about what your strengths are and what a community needs, and figuring out how to marry those two together.
That's sweet. Awesome.
Yeah.
How can a leader infuse leadership development within service learning experiences? So obviously you have a lot of experience with that by planning part of these breaks, training students for these breaks, things like that. But yeah, I guess how can an individual do that when they're maybe practicing leadership, or maybe they're trying to bring that element into their organization or their team?
Yeah, so we talk about something that I think will be a little more relevant to a question you'll have later, but we have an ethical service checklist that we use, and it asks students to consider a whole bunch of questions before they lean into a service experience, and to learn about whether or not that experience is actually good for the community. And thinking back to that asset-based approach, with our service learning experiences, one of the major components that we need to think through is the education before students show up on an experience. That's where you ask the question of, am I needed here, and what is needed here? And if you can answer both of those questions positively, right, then by all means, enter the community and do the thing. But I think students who consider themselves leaders and people who consider themselves leaders need to be able to ask those critical questions of themselves by taking ego out of it.
Right.
Because in volunteering and service work, as you can imagine, ego can get very conflated in that process. And so, being able to see yourself not as a positional leader, but, as someone who does the work.
Right.
And being able to ask yourself tough questions about your intent versus your impact. That piece with the questions around, like, am I educated enough to be having this conversation? Am I educated enough to be going into this community? Or do I need to learn more? What questions should I be asking? Who are the leaders in these communities? All of those pieces, I think, infuse the leadership development pieces that students on our campus are learning through the Leadership Institute with service learning experiences across the country.
That's awesome. What kind of educational experiences may be beneficial then for a leader to kind of do before maybe engaging in that service work? Anything specific come to mind?
So
or
we specifically
that you
call
do?
them issue eds.
Okay.
And for alternative breaks specifically, there are 8 weekly meetings leading up to a week-long break. And every single weekly meeting, one of the students in the group is responsible each week for leading an issue ed.
Okay.
And that often looks like, what does the demographics of the area look like? Who are the change makers in that community already? What work has been done? How does this issue relate to other issues I care about? And really starting to ask those why questions.
Yeah.
One of our reflection exercises that we have students do is called 5 Why. And it is where you start with the most basic question. So I mentioned earlier about students going down and working with baby sea turtles. Why do students need to work with baby sea turtles? And you answer that question, and then you ask why again. And you answer that question, you ask why again, and why again, and why again, until you get down to the root of the issue. For that break, it often looks like, so with the turtles, when they're hatching on the beach, it is often still dark outside, and the moon is their guiding force to help get them to the ocean. However, along the highways of the beaches, all of these big hotels have been built, and the light from the hotels confuses them, and they think the hotels are the moon, and so they go towards the hotels instead of the ocean, and then they end up on the highway, and they get hit by cars, and they don't survive, and so our sea turtle population goes down. And so we would ask, why is there light pollution? Why are places allowed to build on the beach? Why is nobody asking questions about how this is impacting an endangered species? Who is doing this work? And you ask that why question over and over again. And I think that's one that is really easy for people to do by themselves if they don't have a group to process that with. And if at any point in the why you get stuck, that's when you start doing research.
And get that further education.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Not that I haven't really thought that before.
Yeah.
Just kind of,
it's a good one.
Kind of layer, right? You kind of dig deeper into, like you said, you get to that root why of whatever is causing that issue, or maybe find a potential
and you
solution.
could go on forever.
Right, you really could. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you kind of alluded to it a little bit in that last question response as well. As part of that leadership work is doing that work yourself, right? Kind of getting your hands maybe a little bit dirty, jumping in, and kind of modeling the way, right? Or leading with the group you're leading and the team. So kind of going off that, why is actively engaging in one's community so important for a leader to do?
Yeah, I think it's that, like what you just said, that modeling the way piece. It is impossible for a positional leader to be able to accurately give an assessment of what a community needs unless they are entrenched in the community's needs. And so if you don't know that CMU's population is about 20% of students who experience the most severe form of food insecurity, that is hunger, it is impossible to lead this campus because 20% of our students are not having their basic needs met. How are you going to tell them to go to class, right?
Exactly.
So when you don't know what a community needs, you cannot tell them what to do. And so in our office, when we're thinking about students in positional leadership, we often ask them to think about like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and start asking some of those really basic questions of, does my group have what they need to feel safe? Does my group have their most basic needs met? Does my team have a sense of belonging? And if those things are not true, then they cannot reach their fullest potential. And what I would assume is that somebody in positional leadership wants their team to reach its full potential. And so, you can't do that unless you're in the weeds with them.
Right.
Yeah.
I really like how you worded that. I think that's so important too and critical to leadership as well. And it's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, and we also, on one of our previous episodes, talked a lot about ethical leadership. Yeah. But I think we see a lot of the time, unfortunately, these people that are in maybe those positional leadership roles, whether it's through being promoted because they're very good at their job, maybe it's through elections, right? If you're looking at the political landscape and things like that. But then those people maybe or advance so far where they're not in the day-to-day, right? With maybe those middle-level managers or leaders or this, those general employees maybe, or just the people, right? And it's always interesting because like they're making these big decisions that impact a large group of people most of the time, but they don't actually know what's going on. So like how, and you know what I mean, like how are you actually making the right decision? You really don't know. And it causes a lot of problems though, 100%. So.
And it goes back to what I said about asset-based community development. How are you going to assign your team to roles that are going to help them reach their full potential if you don't actually know anything about them?
Right.
And so, if you don't know the community organizations that are at play, if you don't know the issues that are facing your community, no problem solving is going to occur in a way that is actually helpful to anybody.
It's one of those things too that I think is one of those like basic things I think a lot of people know as well. Like, hey, like to get to know your team, you need to spend time with them. But then they still don't do that, or some people don't often do that, and it's just like.
It's very easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day, I think, of positional leadership, and it can be really hard to prioritize that like team building time, which on paper to others might not look like it's so important. But if you're prioritizing, answering emails or doing administrative work to getting to know your team, the whole thing is going to fall apart anyway. And that administrative work will be for nothing.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. So,
yeah.
It's it's an investment in the long term, right?
Yes,
and sometimes we don't see those direct results, and I think maybe that's why sometimes we don't.
Yeah,
or leaders don't always do that work.
It's a practiced skill for sure. For sure. So if you're just starting out, it can be hard.
Definitely. Interesting points there. How can individuals foster a culture of activism and volunteering within their team? So again, maybe like bringing some of that into their team. Maybe they want their team to do more of that work, and maybe their team wants to do that as well.
Yeah, I think you have to prioritize it.
Okay.
So obviously not everybody works on a college campus for the rest of their lives. And so I think at the start, it's about asking yourself questions about your value system before you move on to a forever workplace, understanding what the corporate culture is like of that workplace, understanding their social responsibility commitments and whether or not their values align with yours. Because whether we want to admit it or not, it becomes really difficult to stay involved after college. The rate of volunteering and joining of clubs and organizations goes way down post-college because the opportunity isn't readily available for you. And so when we think about positional leaders like leading by example, modeling the way like we talked about earlier, your employer does that too. And so if your employer doesn't prioritize community building, volunteering, spending time together, then you won't either.
Right.
So this individual culture around activism has to start with where you are spending 8 hours a day plus. And it has to become a priority in your life. And in order for it to be a priority in your life, you have to make it a part of your work life too. Because even though we do not dream of labor, labor is required for survival in this current cultural moment. So, find places that prioritize the things you care about. And if you are the leader of those organizations, again, model the way, lead by example.
That's so important too, just because you think about how much time we spend working in our lives, right?
Yeah.
I mean, 22, traditional age of maybe graduating college, or maybe you enter the workforce a little bit younger. You're working to maybe 60 years old, 8 hours a day, you know what I mean? Like that's a long time. And hopefully, you find something that obviously you're passionate about, which you talk a lot about on this show as well, or things that align with your values. I guess, I don't know if you might have an answer to this one, because it's really, I think, depending on case-to-case situations, but are there any tips for maybe people that are looking at careers or maybe starting that process, how to maybe decipher between what a company says they value and really define it out? Because sometimes you don't really maybe find that out until you're there, unfortunately. But, I think sometimes we see in organizations like, we stand for this cause, or this is our mission, but it's just a thing on the, they put on their wall or on on a document and then nothing ever happens with it, right?
Yeah.
Which obviously kind of defeats the purpose of it. Is there a way maybe for people to kind of notice those things maybe in that process that maybe stick out as warning signs, or does it just really depend?
So something we talk about with the Financial Wellness Collaborative is that like job search process and how to like ask questions during the job interview portion of job searching. And something that everybody can do as part of their benefits negotiation is ask for paid time to volunteer. If that is something that is important to you, it can become a part of your compensation package. So you're not just negotiating salary and you're not just negotiating paid time off, but you can also negotiate paid time to volunteer. And so it can be built right into the culture of your yearly workplace, even if it's just on an individual level. So that's one thing you can do. The second thing I would say is if you're already in a position and you like everything else about the company, but maybe it's not aligning with how much time you want to spend in community, or you're just looking for a little bit more, ask the question. Don't be afraid to ask the question. As part of the research that I mentioned earlier that I did with Dr. Matt Johnson, one thing we asked college graduates is in their new job capacities, how often do they feel that their employer actively works to connect them to community? And we had one person tell us, who works with the automotive industry now in Detroit, say that he had a really, really hard time with his employer and finding connection to the community. He was really active in alternative breaks at CMU, and then that rate of participation dropped off after college, and he was having a really hard time trying to figure out how to reignite that part of himself that was so passionate about volunteering in this new workplace environment. And he got brave and asked the question, and it turns out he got to start an entire division of his company and workplace that works with members now to connect different leaders across departments for creating days of service and community engagement work. And he leads that initiative now and got a bump in pay because of it. So, you know, I think it's that bravery, it's that willingness to hear no and then to push back. If you're already in a place where you just need something a little bit more to help you find your purpose.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a cool story. You never know if you don't ask, right?
Exactly.
And sometimes, you know, maybe there's that cool opportunity. Maybe that's one of those things too I think about. Like maybe that company, organization, team has been wanting to do something like that, but just doesn't have the person that has that drive or those resources or someone that can do that. And then boom, maybe you're that person.
Yes.
So that's a really cool story. Thanks for sharing that. So how, in your role specifically, you touched upon it a little bit already, but how do you infuse leadership development within your role?
Yeah, so I think for me, it is really important for me to get to know my students as their full selves. Who are they when they're not in the volunteer center? Because again, that's that asset-based approach. I need to know what they're passionate about. I need to know what they think their strengths are. We obviously need to have conversations around like, what do you need to work on to become a stronger leader? But I find that if I lead with like, here's what you're really good at, and let's, again, lean in to what you're really, really good at and make that the best and strongest part of who you are in a work or leadership place, then they thrive. And even the stuff they needed to work on, they gain some confidence to be able to work on those things. If you're spending the entire time, specifically with students, I think, having conversations about, like, you're not doing this well, you need to work on this differently, this has to change, this is not going well, you know, whatever the conversation might be, there's zero sense of confidence. In the last couple of years, especially post-COVID, I think the number one thing that I'm realizing with students is that like imposter syndrome piece. And the quickest and easiest way to build up their confidence and get rid of that imposter syndrome is to make sure they're taking care of themselves, but also to find out what it is that they think they're good at and really, really, really work on that with them. Because nobody wants to work on something they're not passionate about. 100%. Everybody wants to do the thing that makes them feel good. So let's do that. And I can't know that unless I get to know them.
It's a really interesting perspective on that. I think it's really important too, as I definitely agree on that. I think it's interesting. I think maybe because of the pandemic, it's accelerated this, but I think for a long time it was like, you got to be well-rounded. You have to work on your weaknesses and your strengths or your growth areas. But really sometimes it's just about diving into what you're already good at, right? What you love to do, because like you exactly said, like no one really wants to work at things that they don't enjoy doing. Now, some things you might need to work at, right? Maybe some skills to get a little bit better at your passion and things
100%.
like that, right? And those situations, but it's interesting, that mindset shift, and I think a lot of good will come out of it. It'll take time to see, but I think with people finding their passion, hopefully working at it, hopefully it's helping and making an impact on others as well. Maybe we'll see some more happiness in the world too. From that, it'd be really cool to see people just excited to do what they love. Yeah, and especially because you spend so much time doing it, right? You might as well, try to find something you love doing. So it's really interesting. How does reflection help students make meaning of service and allow them to lead more effectively or differently in the future?
So like I talked about, we have this amazing thing called the Ethical Service Checklist, and all of the volunteer experiences in the Volunteer Center are built around what we call the triangle of quality service. This is something that comes to us through Breakaway, which is that national alternative breaks partner, and it is 3 sides, as a triangle is, and it is education, direct service, and reflection. And what we say with the triangle is you have to have all 3 components, and that it is not linear, it is cyclical. So you do education, then you do service, then you do reflection, and then you do education and service and reflection. So you're always learning and always asking yourselves questions about what you've learned. But with reflection specifically, what we often have students think about is, what does education and service look like without reflection? If you're not talking about the experiences that you've had after you've had them, especially when you've had them with other people, what does that look like? And most often it looks like lack of belonging or lack of connection to the issue. It can look like not having a conversation about next steps. So those like one-time service experiences that don't actually really make a major impact, but instead are, again, those one-offs. And so without reflection, you're not thinking about what comes next. Or in the case of alternative breaks, if you're not having reflection in West Palm Beach after working with sea turtles, you're not thinking about, well, how do I bring everything I just learned about sea turtles back to Michigan and making that connection? And so then you start asking questions, okay, well, what does light pollution and species endangerment look like in Michigan? And how can I get involved? That conversation doesn't happen without reflection, even internal reflection, because not all reflection has to happen in a group. And the other pieces are whether or not we found or we left the location better than what we found it in. Did our intent of doing good work leave the impact that we wanted it to? And was the partnership that we established during service, because all service is a partnership, was it reciprocal? So, they gave us their time and their expertise and the ability to collect service hours and, all the things that community partners do for us. And what did we do for them in return? It cannot be a one-way street. It cannot be that, kind of like soul-sucking thing that I think a lot of times service can turn into if you're not careful, where we just show up and we don't ask questions and we just do a thing, and then we find out 6 months down the road they didn't actually need that, and it was way more harm than it was good. If you're not having reflection, you're not having any of those conversations with yourself, and that's when that ego can come into play into leadership, I think.
You lose out on that potential growth too as well,
100%. Yeah. We ask students to consider the reflection element through a couple of different lenses. So, of course, for students, that's academic, but it's also personal and civic. And so you're asking yourself specific questions through those 3 lenses that are very different. And it can help, I think, reprioritize what community looks like for you in those different stages of life. Because if academic no longer becomes relevant, but that's the only way you've ever reflected, then post-college, you're not going to know how to do it. So you need to be thinking about it in terms of community building and civic engagement as well as personal growth.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Love to ask this one. I mean, our audience is probably sick of this question, but it's such a good question. Personally, what's your favorite leadership approach or style to utilize when you lead?
I love this question. So when I was originally doing my research, for my master's thesis and I was thinking about college student civic engagement, what most often came up was the social change model, which I think people in higher ed are like really familiar with, and students are really familiar with. But there was an awesome team at the University of Michigan that looked at the social change model and said, you know, this is great, but I think it leaves out some really critical questions around how social change and leadership relates to minoritized identities and who holds the power and privilege in conversations around social justice. Because when we are thinking about specifically like collaboration, the voices in the room that have historically held the most power, even in the best conversations, are still going to get prioritized.
Right.
And so this model is called the Social Action, Leadership, and Transformation Model, or SALT for short. And again, it's out of University of Michigan. The authors on it did an amazing job, but it really takes the social change model and expands it to make sure that it specifically has conversations around race and gender. And it goes so much deeper, and it's really cool. Really, really cool.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
Also, I got to say, real shout out, like, you brought materials. I love it. Like, for notes, super
Materials.
cool. Some resources.
We'll
definitely have to link those two
will,
in the description eventually when we get this video going. I love that.
But, like, one of the things this model talks about is, like, our capacity for empathy. Like, that's so cool.
Yeah.
And when we think about EQ versus IQ, you know, we're really just starting to have those conversations, but to have a model that specifically says that you have to have a capacity for empathy in order to be a leader, I think is revolutionary and so cool. It's so cool.
It is so cool.
Yeah.
Like you said, too, it is a conversation that I think is becoming more well known, especially around EQ, which is emotional intelligence, by the way, and how that's so important. And oftentimes there's statistics and data that shows that it's more important than IQ, right? So,
100%.
which we can dive into emotional intelligence at a different time. It's super, super fascinating topic. But and there's
really
tons of resources out there if you're interested back home to kind of learn about that. But that's a really cool model. I actually haven't heard about that going deeper.
It's
so
cool.
I'm excited to learn more about it.
Yeah.
That's really nice. Kind of answered this a little bit earlier, but is there any more of how ethical leadership through service and what it looks like?
Yeah, so I can talk about the other two parts of the triangle of quality service. So we talked about reflection, but I can talk about education. And so that is really that like 5 why model I talked about earlier. That's when you're going to start doing some of that digging deeper root causes, because you don't even know what to educate yourself on until you've dug deeper, which is why it's a cyclical model and you're constantly having to start over, because after you've learned or done more, you need to learn more. You know better questions to ask. You know better questions to ask of who. And so it really gives volunteers and community partners the space to collaborate on that knowledge and to co-create it together, and to ask questions of each other, because part of this whole like community collaboration thing is that everybody comes with a different perspective, and problem solving happens better when we can ask each other questions and work off of each other. But also it's sometimes really, really basic. Like, I'm working with Habitat for Humanity to build a house, and I've never used a power tool before. I should probably learn how to do that. So I don't hurt myself or hurt somebody else. So education can be really, really basic, like how do I use a saw? Or it can be really, really complex, like what does definitionally power, privilege, and oppression mean, and how do those three things relate to each other? So it is the entire spectrum of those things. And again, we ask the question of what does service and reflection look like without the education piece? You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. It's an empty experience. You could be doing more harm than good. The intent and the impact do not align. And the community probably doesn't want you there if you don't know what you're talking about or haven't done the base level of respect to them by doing research before you show up. So that education piece is step 1, and it is crucial, and step 1 should always come after step 3. So the third piece is the direct service. Again, what does education and reflection look like without service? And I think that is what often happens in the classroom if you're not connecting classroom content to real life content. And so when we talk about service learning on college campuses, that's really what we mean is taking the theories and the group projects and the lectures and turning that into real life action. And it's the whole thing, right? It's where you're building connections, a sense of belonging. You're getting to learn who those change makers are, and you are really helping the community in those like indirect service spaces take things off their plate that they might not have otherwise ever had time to get to, and really freeing up their time to do what they do best. But if you're not careful, then that's where it can turn into things like saviorism. And so that's, again, where reflection education come into play. You're asking yourself, why am I doing this? You're checking your ego at the door, and you're doing the hard work that is required of you.
Awesome. Yeah. Gotta have all 3 parts of the triangle.
All 3 parts of the triangle.
All 3 parts.
All 3 parts are required, and it is cyclical, always.
Always. They follow each other. That's awesome.
Yes.
What are some resources for people out there looking to maybe educate themselves a little bit more on ethical service and leading through service groups or opportunities? If there's a couple, you can shout them out.
So I think depending on what you're interested in, there's going to be different avenues for getting involved and for doing research. But like Google is your best friend, right? And it is free, and you should use it.
I love Google.
Research the things that you care about. Find out who is already doing this work. Do research on organizations that have been in this fight for a long time, because social justice is work, and it takes time, and nothing is solved overnight. So find who the key players are, and make sure that you are getting perspectives from multiple people, and you're making sure that those perspectives are diverse, so that you can get a well-rounded range of opinions on any issue that you are passionate about or wanting to learn more about. But yeah, nonprofits exist for literally almost anything, and start small, start local, and then, asking the leaders in those community organizations who they look to on a like larger national conversation can get you a good start. But Google's your best friend. Use it.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome. What role does empathy play in both creating and participating in service learning experiences?
Yeah, so we talk a lot about, in our office, the active citizen continuum, which is basically just an understanding of where students are coming into the conversation when they join a volunteer center program. Step 1 is a member. All the way on the other side of the continuum is an active citizen. And your members are people who are like really not curious. They don't care about their role in social justice issues. They are just floating through life. And that is not for us to judge. And that can be really, really hard for our like student leaders and student facilitators to understand how somebody could sign up for a volunteer experience and like not really care about it. But the reality is they might not have space to care about it. They might be, again, worrying about those basic needs being met. They might have a full-time job plus a full-time class load. They might be caregivers and have families that they're looking after. Not everybody has the ability to dedicate their full selves to solving social problems, even if those social problems impact them. So having empathy and an understanding that everybody's resources and what they bring to the table looks different is super, super important, so that we're entering these conversations without judgment and instead from a place of learning.
I love that. That's awesome. That perspective is just so important. Like you said, looking at it from different angles, and I'm trying to understand, which is really difficult too. That's one of those skills, especially when you're so passionate about something and you care so much.
Why does nobody else care about this thing I care about?
It's really difficult, but one of those skills that's so important to service learning, to leadership, to really anything when you're working with other people. So
we always say that like we don't care why people come in the door, but once they're in the door, they're going to learn something. So come see us for any reason, but when you're here, we're probably going to have some hard conversations.
Okay. Yeah. I like that. How do you ensure that your team members are kind of aligned with the mission and values of the organization, or I guess in this particular maybe experience, alternative breaks, delivering that service learning experience?
Yeah, it can be really hard with volunteers to hold them accountable, to get everybody on the same page, to make sure that even those members who are showing up in the door and don't really care about it, but we want them to stick around so they learn something. It can be really hard when there's not something that holds them accountable to being in that space. It's not like a class where like, hey, you paid for it, so you should probably show up. And it's not like a job where, hey, we're paying you, you need to show up for it. And so it is 2 pieces. One is that we need to convince them that if they go along with the mission, if they can align themselves with the goals that we have for them, that the things that they are going to get from it are exponentially greater than what they are giving. It is, again, that reciprocal relationship where you give us your time and we are going to give you transferable skills around communication, around dialogue, around time management and organization. And you're going to be able to take all those transferable skills to the bank during a job offer and during a salary negotiation. They're going to help you nail the thing that is important to you down the line. That's really important. The other piece is always starting with their why, like what got you in the door. If it's you need service hours for a class, great, I can help you with that. But in order for me to give you those service hours, you got to get on board.
Right.
Or it might be I want to learn more about the environmentalism or historical preservation or math and reading tutoring with elementary students. If that's what gets you in the door, great, I can work with that. But you have to understand why they showed up in the first place. And again, it's that asset-based community development where we are working with what makes them feel confident and good about being in a space with us.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's your perspective on collaboration?
Yeah. So we talk a lot about this with our Central Civics program and when we have to talk to students about why our program is nonpartisan, even though I think a lot of the students who come to us come with like very partisan feelings, which, yeah, as they should. If you're a person in the world who cares about things, like you probably have a leaning, right? But our program, because it's university funded, has to be nonpartisan, but also because I firmly believe, and I think the folks who work with that program firmly believe that it takes all kinds of voices and perspectives and opinions in a room to solve a problem that is beneficial to the most amount of people. When you don't have diverse voices in a room, and that is diversity in all aspects, right? In gender and race, but also in ideology, then you are missing entire pieces of the puzzle when you are solving a problem. And if you're not thinking about people's resources, again, like where are they coming from and how can we meet them where we are? I don't know anything about a person that I don't agree with or match their identities with at all. I don't know anything about their lived experience. So they need to be at the table so they can tell me about it, and I need to be willing to listen. And collaboration requires all of those voices to be at the table in order for problem solving to be at its best.
100%. And that's probably also a big reason why we're seeing, and not just in the political landscape, but in a lot of just things in general, that large disagreement, large scale, maybe because all those voices aren't at the table, right, or being represented. And a lot of the times, too, things aren't just so, to the right or left or black and white. There's that gray or that middle area, that moderate area where you need to have kind of all those opinions to find that compromise, right, or that solution to the problem. You kind of mentioned it earlier, your passion of helping people kind of figure out how to have those conversations, those difficult conversations, maybe through that civic engagement piece or things that those issues that they're passionate about. What are some ways people can work on those skills?
So I think first, we all need to do this like realignment of conflict in our brains. Conflict is such a scary thing. And I think depending on how you grew up with conflict and how you've seen conflict modeled for you, it can be like anxiety inducing for people, but conflict is not a bad thing. Conflict is a gift because it means we're working through something together and you care about me enough to have the conversation in the same way that feedback is a gift, right? I care about you enough to tell you how you can do better and show up better for me and, vice versa. Conflict is really just how we're problem solving, and conflict does not mean we're yelling. Conflict does not mean that there's name calling. Conflict does not mean any of those things, but it can.
Right.
And so we have to learn healthy strategies around conflict and active listening skills and, not raising our voices and not name calling and coming from a place of compassion and listening to hear rather than, and to understand rather than to respond. Right. We have to have this like realignment of what we think conflict is in our head. And if we don't do that, then we're never going to get to where we need to go as far as, that collaboration and problem solving is concerned.
Could you imagine if just people listened a little bit more?
It would change the world
so much, right? Even just a little bit more.
Yeah, even just like the smallest bit. Yeah,
right. We'd be way better off. Oh man, do you have any opinions on why people don't listen?
I think I can only speak for myself in the times I haven't listened.
Yeah.
And for me, it often is because I am so worried about self-preservation and protecting what I believe to be true and the world as I have viewed it, that I am so afraid of that like cognitive dissonance. I'm worried that what you are going to tell me is going to be so shifting of my perspective that it is going to become painful, and I'm going to have to reevaluate what I have believed to be true. And I think that's certainly true in a political sphere.
Yeah.
If you learn a new piece of information that changes the way you have viewed the world, that's painful.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. And then you have to admit you're wrong, or you were wrong.
Yeah.
And you can't learn and grow unless you admit that maybe what you thought previously wasn't true. But that is not easy work.
No,
and it's a huge
hard.
thing to ask of people.
Yeah.
But I think that's where that like capacity for empathy comes in, because right now admitting you were wrong can have major consequences.
For sure.
Socially and otherwise. And so if we can get to a place where admitting you're wrong and doing something else is celebrated versus it being punished or being a punishable offense, then I think we can clear up space for people to listen better.
100%. I feel like that was so many things, taking that ownership, right?
Yes.
Of being wrong, being okay with making a mistake. But like you said, you know, it's scary, it's difficult. And also, like, again, like we want to avoid, you know, maybe that process because it is painful, right? We don't want to go through that.
And how good would it feel if you told somebody something and they said back to you, like, you know what, I've never thought about it like that before. Thanks for sharing that. I'm going to sit with that for a while.
Exactly.
And then that's the end.
Right.
Like, that dissolves the conflict.
100%.
And that's it. That's it. Yeah.
Things would be so much better.
I know.
Huh? It is very difficult to do, though.
Hard. It's really hard.
Especially like you said, when things are changing, or maybe you have a new view. Especially if you've thought about that for so long, or that's been rooted in who you are, maybe. And or
it's
where
identity based often. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's difficult to do, but so I think too with that is we're so hard on ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the other side of it, where, but it makes sense too why we are, but at the same time, that also takes a lot of work to really, tear that down. It's like that saying, how can you be nice to other people if you're not nice to yourself first, right? Or whatever you want to use as an adjective or the descriptive word, but that really does mean something. But again, it's hard to do that. And
so maybe when we all do our like affirmations in the mirror where we tell ourselves how great we are, we also practice in the mirror how to admit when we're wrong.
That might be a good activity.
Do it hand in hand.
There you go. That's your activity right now. So if you're still listening, comment that you're going to go do that right
Perfect.
in the description. All right. So how would you personally define civic engagement?
Yeah. So I think people who are engaged in their communities and civically engaged are people who have found a way, like we mentioned earlier, to make community a priority in their lives. That's what the active citizen continuum tells us, and I firmly believe that when community becomes the priority in your life choices and in your value system, that is when you are going to actively become a person who fights for your community. And I think that's what civic engagement is fighting for your community, no matter what you believe in. Yeah, it's a fight for the world we want to live in and the world we want to leave our families when we're not here anymore. And you can't do that unless it's a priority. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Simple
Way to simplify it.
Yeah.
But that's really powerful at the same time. What are the benefits of being what are the benefits of being civically engaged, and why is it so important?
There is this political guy. His name is Robert Putnam, and anybody who's into politics is going to be like, why did she just call him a political guy? But he's just like a researcher. But he's awesome, and he has this book called Bowling Alone, and it is the entire concept of this is that back in the early 1900s to like the mid to late like 70s, people were joiners. They joined bowling leagues, which is why it's called Bowling Alone. They joined churches and church groups and had like Sunday schools, and they joined like neighborhood organizations and book clubs, and they found their people, these mini pockets of community. And in those mini pockets of community, they found belonging and connection. And belonging and connection are the things that make community a priority to you, because you want things to be better for your bowling league, right? And so you ask questions around how your community, what businesses they bring into town. Is the bowling alley thriving, right? Or you ask questions around like funding allocations, because it impacts these groups that you belong to. In the late 1900s, when we stopped being joiners and stopped being a part of these micro communities, the voting rates went way down. And what he did with his research is he made a one-to-one connection with joining organizations and voting. And so when we think about the benefits of civic engagement, it's kind of chicken or egg. Like, do you vote because you belong to a community, or do you belong to a community because you vote? And it's both. It's both. Because we're building the communities we want to live in, we're building the communities we want for our families, but also we are active participants of these communities. And the people in these organizations, whether they look like us or not, are our friends, and we care about them. And so we also vote and civically fight for them in the same way we would fight for ourselves. Politics goes beyond your front yard then in that aspect. And so when you become civically engaged, you build this sense of connection, but then you also have this sense of agency and purpose, because again, you're fighting for not only the people you care about, but now you're fighting for yourself. And again, that I think when we talked about bravery earlier and asking your employer to align with your values and to give you opportunities to fight for your values, all of that is purpose related, and knowing what it is in a community that makes you feel cared about. And civic engagement can help you get there when you vote for, the world you want to see.
That's really fascinating. You said it was called Bowling Alone?
Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam.
Robert Putnam. I have to check that out. We'll also put that down in the description if we remember. But why, I guess I'm curious now, in your perspective, why do you think maybe that community aspect went down in the late 1900s? So
one of the things that Putnam cites is like people are just less religious now, and that's where a lot of those groups were coming from, is that that religious piece. And this is not me like advocating for religion, but this is just one of the correlations he found, is that when people as a society, we became less religious, we were less connected with our communities and joining less things. Obviously in more recent years, it's COVID, right? Like it was, we couldn't be in public together. 100%. And so now we're just trying to figure out how to be back in public spaces together again. And I think, it's why things this summer, like the Barbie movie and Oppenheimer and the Taylor Swift concert, like why all of those things brought like mass sense of community back, because we are desperate to feel like we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. And so I'm really, really hoping that this is a shift in people joining things again, because I mean, you can attest even on campus, like to get people to sign up for anything and to show up for anything, it's hard. We've gotten very used to joining from the internet, and it's just not the same. Your sense of connection can be genuine, but it is not the same as being in community in physical space with another person. And so Putnam says, back in the 80s, it was religion. I'm saying it's the internet. But and COVID. But I'm hoping that this summer was kind of the turning point.
I definitely feel that way too. I think there is that need or want for that community, especially too, as it's in our biology, right? We're social creatures. Like we want belonging. We want to belong to something. And I think it has been difficult to find maybe what that means and maybe what a positive belonging is for people, right? Because of the pandemic. Then you throw in technology, which is always that interesting debate with technology, especially like, so you're more connected than ever in the world, but you're also really not, right? It's more of like the whole idea of like that genuine, like, oh, this person's my really good friend versus an acquaintance. That's kind of how I think about it with like those connections, right? Like you might be connected with more people, but as strong before, and I don't think it is either.
And you said positive connection. Like connection can also go deep, dark, scary. Right. So just be careful.
100%. Especially with technology.
Yes.
And internet.
Agreed. Agreed.
You can definitely find whatever you're looking for if you really want to find it.
Correct.
So
Correct.
that's really interesting though. How does civic engagement then relate to leadership and leadership development? We kind of talked about that a little bit, but
yeah. So community-based problems are everyone's responsibility.
Okay.
It is everyone's job to ask how they can make their community a better place, but that doesn't mean it's every single person's job to run for office.
right.
It can start really, really small, and it might mean like picking up trash.
Uh-huh.
It can mean running for office, and that is cool. You should do that if that's what you want to do. But it doesn't have to be that. Being a supporting member of a community is just as critical and important as being a positional leader in a community. And I think when students learn that not all leadership is positional, that's when things shift for them, and they can see that, like whatever it is I choose to bring to the table, like that matters in my community, and and civic engagement means not just voting either, like in the same way that leadership and civic engagement is not just running for office.
Right.
Civic engagement is activism, it is social media, it is protest, it is boycott, it is also voting.
Yeah.
It is uplifting voices, and sometimes it's just being a listener.
Yeah.
And when you stop assigning these really rigid boxes to what definitionally we think leadership or civic engagement means, it all cracks wide open, and it's much easier to get involved and a lot less scary to get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So many important nuggets of information right there. Definitely re-listen to that answer. So sometimes as a leader, when civically engaged, there can be a lot to do and a lot of change that is needed. Like you talked about a little bit earlier. It's not an overnight change usually, especially when you throw in the activism piece to that. And that can be overwhelming at times for really anyone, right? There's a lot to do, especially when maybe even trying to start a movement or get it off, the ground and running. What tips do you have for a leader to more easily navigate that type of situation?
So I knew you were going to ask this question, so I brought a poem
that
I love that I read to our alternative break students, because they often get stuck in this question of like, yeah, I'm going on this thing for a week and I'm going to do 40 hours of service, but like, who cares? Yeah. It's not going to solve the problem. And so this poem addresses that, and it's called "The Ones Who Doubt the Worth of Doing Anything If You Can't Do Everything." You say the little efforts that I make will do no good. They will never prevail to tip the hovering scale where justice hangs in balance. I don't think I ever thought they would. But I am prejudiced beyond debate in favor of my right to choose which side shall feel the stubborn ounces of my weight. And basically what this unnamed poem is saying is what Obama said and what MLK said before Obama said, of that arc of justice is long. But I choose to be on the side of longevity, and I choose to be on the side of what is good and right, no matter how long it takes. And so when I say, that when you say that my efforts make no difference, when I tell myself that my efforts make no difference, it's okay to say, yeah, you're right. That's okay. But I have limited time on this earth.
Right.
And I choose to be stubborn and put my stubborn weight towards justice, because eventually, if we all put our stubborn weight towards justice, it will make a difference. It just takes all of us to get there. And I get to choose how I spend my time, and I spend my time trying to make the world a better place, even if it makes no difference today, because it'll make a difference someday.
Exactly. And it probably is making very small differences,
incremental difference
that we don't always see.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that gets
small incremental differences.
I think that's with anything, right? It's like, use the example, if you go into the gym, right, maybe someone's trying to get in shape, you don't see results, after 2 days. But then if you don't see results, it's discouraging. So why do you want to keep doing it, right? But over time, it takes time.
Yes, 100%.
And just like anything, right?
Not today, but maybe tomorrow.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. So following that kind of previous question, how can an individual empower themselves and others to focus on what they can control?
Yeah. So what I tell students, or what I ask them, I guess, is like, what is your sphere of influence today? Often it's your peers. And so at the top of this, I talked about how word of mouth is our most powerful tool for getting students involved. I think it's this same exact thing here. what is your sphere of influence? Who can you talk to in your everyday life and convince them to vote, to convince them to use their voice, convince them to listen differently, convince them to have dialogue with you, convince them to give an hour of their time. All of that matters. And that's those stubborn ounces, right? That's where that incremental difference becomes a big difference, because then you're rallying a community rather than just an individual. And so I think when you feel small and when things feel hard, that's when you lean into community the most. But community is not given to us. We have to work for it, and we have to go find it.
Community is not given to us. We have to work for it, and we have to find it.
Yes.
Yeah, so many great points here you made. How important is having patience within civic engagement work? We kind of touched upon that a little bit, but I think that's super crucial, right? So I guess, one, it's obviously important. We just kind of discussed that, but how can we work at that skill as people? Because I think it's something I think it's very difficult, especially in this instant gratification world.
Yes,
that we
everybody should go to therapy is what I have to say about that. Change takes time, whether it be personal change, community-based change, social justice change, whatever it is. It just takes time. And that's because the world is like a really complicated place, and collaboration requires you to take a step back and for things to sometimes just like play out. We don't have all the answers today, and we probably won't have all the answers tomorrow, but if we keep asking the questions, then maybe we'll get there. And I don't think patience means that you just stop working.
Right.
Patient means that you're okay with getting up and working again tomorrow. And you got to give up some of that sense of control, which is really, really hard, I think, especially post-COVID when everything felt out of control. Right. And I think, it's a skill that is one of those transferable things that we tell students that they're going to get from volunteering and, all of that. The more entrenched you become in social justice work and service work and volunteering and civic engagement, the more familiar with patience you must become. And it is just a skill that takes time and practice. Yeah. So you have to be patient to learn patience.
Catch-22 vibe.
Yes.
No, I'm really glad you mentioned that too. Is patience doesn't mean you stop working, right? You can work really hard and be patient.
100%.
Right? And usually you need that, right?
Yes.
You need to work hard and be patient with those results.
Yes.
But continue in the day-to-day working hard, but in the long term have that element of patience, which is really hard to do, especially because we want to see those results, especially if we're working hard, right? Why wouldn't you? But you have to be patient to work on being patient.
Yes. Yes.
Simple but complex, right?
Yes.
Always. That's how life is, right? How can leaders maintain a positive outlook when facing challenges beyond their control?
Yeah. I think, again, I'll say it till I'm dead, but like that's where community comes in. Okay. Something else we say in our office is like, hope is not a strategy that can be employed all the time, but hope is often the strategy when considering civic engagement and social justice work. Without hope, what are we doing? Yeah. So when I say hope is not a strategy, I mean that like for students, you can't say, well, I hope that paper gets done. You have to write the paper. Right. So like get to work. But hope can be a strategy when you're considering really, really big, complex problems. Like, I've done all I can and now I hope it works out. Or I have hope that the world is going to be a better place. That doesn't mean that just like the student working on their paper, you don't have to take steps to get there. But in order to take those steps, you have to have an inherent sense that the world can be a better place and that people are good. And in order to believe those things, we have to have hope. Yeah. And so when the world looks deep and dark and sad and things are hard and they are tough, we lean on the people who we love and we care about, and we lean on hope. And that's hard. Yeah. It's hard. And again, it's a learned practice skill to believe that hope has a place in this conversation.
Super inspiring message, though, right? I mean, we had one of our previous elected officials run on that as a campaign, but it's so true. And he won. Yeah. And he won. Hope is so important to have.
For him, hope was a strategy.
Yeah, right. Seriously. But obviously it resonated with a lot of people as well, though, right? Yes. In that moment. So this is, I love to ask this question too, but I'm curious to get your perspective on this. But how can we challenge and push the importance of leadership and leadership development at both like the macro and micro level to make positive change?
Yeah, so I think in this instance, there are places where starting macro makes sense, but with volunteering and civic engagement work, I think micro always is the place to start.
Okay.
Start local.
Okay.
Run for local office, vote in your local elections, understand your local politics, ask questions of your local leaders, volunteer your time at your local shelters, nonprofits, parks, etc. When you see a difference in your local community, that is what gives you fuel and some of that hope to be able to fight on the more macro level. We talked a little bit earlier about like instant gratification and that being hard. Starting local is the instant gratification. When you see that your individual vote made a difference in the school board election, right? Because often those things come down to the single digit votes. Candidates are winning by like 2 or 3 votes in those cases, but they are making policy widespread across their communities.
Right.
And so if you're not voting local, if you're not spending your dollar local, if you're not giving your time local, then like, what are we doing? That's your community. That's where it matters. And if every single person devoted their time to their local, then the national would simply just get better. It's like trickle up volunteering and service and time. And so, yeah, I think when we think about all of this, the local is where you're going to get the most hope. Local is where you're going to get the most impact. Local is where you are going to see your time make the biggest difference.
That's so interesting because I think that's so overlooked a lot of the time, right? The local things. I mean, like you said, all the time. And those things are usually, whether it's, again, policy or like election-based, like, again, those things are, like you said, oftentimes down by only a handful of votes even. And that, like you said, impacts the entire community and that future community.
Life.
Right. I don't think sometimes enough people value that enough.
No,
and I'm just thinking, even myself doing reflection, like, I don't always think about that.
Reflection, you say.
Reflection, right? One of the parts of the triangle, one of the sides of the triangle. But how can, I guess, people learn a little bit more about maybe some of those local politics in their area or local issues? Because sometimes that can be a little bit difficult to find for some people if it's not, because it's not maybe on the national news scene, right?
So if you're connected to your community in a way that you feel comfortable reaching out to like your city and your local clerks, they're a wealth of knowledge about local elections and can give you updates. Otherwise, vote411.org is a website where you can put in your address. It'll tell you which precinct you vote in, who your local officials are, and if there are any upcoming elections, it breaks down by like what's on your ballot and gives you both sides to break down and get an understanding of what you're voting for. Vote 411 is an amazing resource, and it's ran by the League of Women Voters, and it's a national resource.
That's awesome. I didn't know about that. So another great resource. Tons of resources here.
Favorite.
If you could share one piece of advice with the audience in relation to leadership and leadership development, what would that be?
So we've talked a lot about like positional leadership, but I think breaking that mindset that like leadership is positional. Everybody is a leader if they want to be. It's about how you invest your time and your commitment to your community. That stay local piece we talked about, and then that 5 why question, like asking yourself why in all areas and aspects, so that you can just get real with yourself. Just always be real with yourself and take care.
How do we, I'm curious to get your perspective on this and your opinions, but how can we kind of fight against that maybe that misconception that you have to have a position to be a leader, right? Because this is something we always talk about, right? Working with students. I know in our department, Leadership Institute, and the Volunteer Center, in a lot of places. And that's, I think it's common for people and students at least to come here and being like, I mean, I was kind of that way too when I started that journey. I was like, no, I'm not in this positional role. But you can make, I know we talked about, you can make such a big difference by not having that title. But how do we maybe push that, again, that information to more people?
I'm curious to know is there a moment where you remember a breakthrough for you?
For me, a specific breakthrough. It's funny, we talked about this a couple episodes, but Yeah, it was definitely through getting involved through one of our programs here called Leadership Safari at SMU. Great program if you want to be a part of it, or just definitely look into it as well. Come to SMU, 100%. Always, we do, right?
Yep.
But it was one of those
should
more.
pay us.
Yeah, they should. It was one of those more advanced roles, and it really saw me. I felt I had more responsibility leading a team versus. Maybe just doing some of those small leadership roles, and involving in that process was a mentor. She talked about mentorship a lot too already. But that's really when I saw the change, because I felt like I did make that impact, right? I could see kind of some of those roles, like, wow, I never realized this. Or it took that person to kind of remind me that I was doing those things, and that's kind of when everything changed for me, for sure. But
yeah, I think my experience is similar.
Okay.
So with alternative breaks in my undergrad, there are positions of leadership within alternative breaks. You can become a student site leader, which leads these experiences. You can become a board member, which plans the experiences. But I had gone on 5-week-long breaks just as a participant, because I was also really stuck in that mindset of like, I'm not a leader. I could not possibly be in charge of a group of 10 peers. And I need more time. I need more practice. I'm not ready. And it took a mentor reaching out and saying like, no, you can do this because you've already been doing it.
Exactly.
And it took a shift in my mindset of seeing that being an active member of my campus community and in these communities that I was visiting for a short time to volunteer with, I was already doing the exact same things that the leaders were doing. I just didn't have the title.
Right.
And I think we've talked about ego a lot today, and I think title gets wrapped up in that a lot of like, I need somebody to like point to me and be like, they're the one. And without that, it doesn't feel real. But if you can, I think, really break down the individual characteristics and values that you think a leader is, and see where you're already doing that in your day-to-day life, like that matters. Yeah. But I think it's also based on what you said, and what I'm saying is, if you are in a position of leadership and of power, make sure you're reaching out to people that you either mentor formally or informally to say like, no, you're already doing this and you're a leader too. Yeah. Because, we imposter syndrome again, like we've all got it until we don't, or we chronically have it forever if you're me. But if nobody ever tells you that you're good enough, maybe you never find out. Right. And it really just takes like one person you care about and respect to tell you that like what you're doing matters and you're already doing the work of a leader. So it's a lot harder to do it for yourself, I think, but it is possible. Right. You just have to, again, make that list and see where you're already doing the work. Right. I think it's one of those things care about yourself enough to admit that you're already doing the work.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, too, where sometimes it helps if you are sharing it to other people, right? And celebrating those successes and, again, encouraging people and maybe building some of that confidence around that. And I'm really glad you touched upon those things, that information as well, because it is sometimes hard to see yourself as a leader. But it really is, I think, oftentimes, not necessarily even the people, but it's doing those small things, right, that really define someone as a strong leader and making those big changes over time.
Did you, like, ask your team members how they're doing today?
Right.
Like, that's a leader.
Right. Exactly. Showing up for your people.
Yeah. Doing the work you would ask someone else to do. All of those things. Yeah.
Right. I mean, we talk about too, but I think it's so important as well. It's like that leadership component that's a choice though too at the end of the day, right? That's like, it was one of the things we talked about a lot during our ethical leadership kind of conversation in one of our previous episodes, but about how you can't just show up when things are good, right? Leadership's hard. It's challenging. And you have to show up when things are negative, unfortunately. Yeah. Hopefully things aren't always negative, right? Or there's more positives in that, but that can be really difficult to do as well.
We're living in a hard world
right
now. Like,
exactly.
Things are tough. And if you're not showing up for your people right now, then like they don't want to see you when it's time for a pizza party.
Right. Yeah. 100%. So awesome. All right, we're going to go into everyone's favorite segment of the show, the mellow moment here. So something we like to do on our show is we like to ask our previous guest a question around leadership to our next guest. They don't know who it is. Okay. So we have a question for you. Okay. It's from Yasis. You know Yasis?
I love Yasis, yeah.
So he's got a good question. We're going to bring out Mello here, our chief technology officer, our show producer. So let you answer that. Yeah. Pretty much everyone gets stumped a little bit.
Oh, okay.
But so be prepared for that. Okay. It's totally cool. And then after that, We'll come back out and we'll have you ask our next guest, which you don't get to know who it is. A question revolving around leadership.
Trying to think, but
okay. You'll think of something. So we'll bring out Mello here and let's get to it.
Is it a good question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think it's a pretty good
High
question.
expectations for Yasis.
As a leader, what was the biggest win/success you've had as a leader?
So, when I accepted the job I am currently in, I was not the committee's first choice. I was not originally selected for my position. They offered it to somebody else. That person turned it down, and then it was offered to me afterwards, which felt like a huge loss and a major blow. And it had a real kick to confidence for me. I was still in grad school and about to graduate, and trying to figure out what was going to come next. And I loved this program so much. I wanted to stay. And so that no was really hard. And then it was, I think, even harder when it turned into a yes, because then I had that imposter syndrome coming in and had to figure out, like, okay, I'm not who they wanted, but how do I still show up and be me? And so I think my biggest success for myself is that I did figure that out. I figured out how to not change anything about myself in order to fit what I thought they needed me to be, since I wasn't originally accepted. And then not only did I do the job as myself, I did the job as myself really well. And I was able to bring a unique set of skills that have paid off in the long run as things like staff reduction and budget cuts have come through, because my set of skills is more diverse than what other candidates were bringing to the table. And so I can wear more hats for my team in order to support them. And that support made our alternative breaks program #1 in the country for the very first time this last year. So, yeah, I think that's a win.
I think that's a win, too. And I, even during this whole podcast, I see a lot of, like, myself in you, like vice versa.
Oh, great.
And it's like things you talk about. One is imposter syndrome. I struggle with that a lot, thinking I'm not doing enough. 2, wanting to, like, change the world and stuff like that. Like, I had a friend who told me, you know, you can't change the world overnight.
Never.
You know, and I was just like, damn, you know, like, I really want to.
I'll leave you this poem. I'll leave you the poem.
For me, thanks.
Yeah, there you go.
but yeah, that's a wonderful success to hear, you know, of wanting to have that position, maybe not feeling like you were qualified, and then going above and beyond and bringing more to the table than someone else could have brought. So I relate. So
yeah, it can be really hard when we're our toughest critics.
Yeah.
But
the toughest.
When we figure out how to love ourselves enough to not betray the skills we bring to the table by trying to be somebody else, that's when we're our most successful, I think.
Exactly. And the funny thing is, not only are you your toughest critic, but, like, you're your biggest fan. Like, I'm my biggest fan. Yeah, like,
so, I'm great.
Exactly. Yeah. And then and before I go, it's a lot of, I think, in society, people, and it's like different levels of ego. I forgot exactly what it is. It's like the id or something like that.
Yeah,
like,
the iceberg.
Yeah. But, like, I mean,
I took one psych class.
Yeah, I didn't say that's where I got that from. But it's like, who say you can't love yourself? Like, if the whole world hates me, at least I love myself. Yeah. And I feel like nowadays we have this society where it's like you can't like promote yourself, or you can't like uplift yourself, or you can't just go like, I won't say me, but like I'm doing my thing.
Or in a world
you know?
of social media, it almost feels like false.
Yeah.
When you hype yourself up, and it feels like performative, but like, for some people, I think that performance is the whole thing. That's them convincing themselves and getting in the routine of loving themselves. So, yeah, post the selfie and give yourself a shout out on Facebook and release a press release to your family, letting them know you got a new job or position or whatever.
Exactly.
And continue to hype yourself up until it becomes second nature.
Exactly. So I like that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it was good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
So see ya. And thanks for this.
You're welcome. Put it on the fridge.
I will.
Great answer to that question, Sam. Didn't get stumped. You just rolled through that. I love that.
Yeah, well, you know.
Yeah, it was great. Mello, thank you for that. Everyone loves a Mello moment. So what's your question going to be now?
I'm trying to think. So what that made me think of is how often we are defined by like our lowest moments. So I guess my question for the next person would be like, what would you perceive as your biggest failure, and then what did you learn from that to make you better?
What would you perceive as your biggest failure, and what did you learn from that?
Yeah.
To
make you better.
To make you better?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Or are you still learning it? Yeah.
That's going to be a good one. I'm excited to see who's going to answer that and what they're going to respond says. But our audience, y'all are going to have to wait too and tune in the next episode to get that. So, again, thanks for being here. It was super awesome. So where can people find you, and maybe are there any other I know we talked a lot about resources already. Is there anything else that came to mind that maybe we can share?
If you want to stay connected to what CMU Alternative Breaks is doing, we're on Facebook and Instagram at CMICHAB. So it's CMISH AB. The Volunteer Center is at CMU Volunteers on all platforms. You can find me on all the places at Symantha Dattilo, but my first name is spelled with a Y, so it's SYMANTHADATTILO. And resources, let's see. I think Vote 411 is the big win for today. Like, it is truly the coolest website that breaks things down to the smallest detail and makes it understandable, so that when you enter the ballot box, you are the most informed. It also gives you a sample ballot so that you can print it off and literally like fill it out and bring that with you to the voting booth, so it's already done and filled out, and you're not like looking candidates up in the voter booth. It really
We've all been there before, haven't we?
Yeah. It's for all of my girls out there who like to like over prepare. That's the one. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah. Awesome.
I think that's it.
Well, let's ask you this question then, since you're a big book person here. What's the what educational book are you reading right now, or maybe you most recently read that was really insightful, or that you really enjoyed?
Let me think. Let's see. Identity-based student activism is really good if you're in student affairs and wondering how to support students through building up an identity that is based in making a difference in community. It's so good. If you are a person who looks like me and is trying to figure out how to have conversations around race where you don't put your foot in your mouth, Good White People is really, really, really fantastic at like checking yourself. And I think the other one I would say is Disability Visibility. Really opened up the conversation for me around disability activism. It is a collection of essays put together by an author named Ellis Wong, and it is first-person stories about individuals' identities and how they move with those identities through the world that is not designed to care for people with disabilities in any capacity. And it made me think. Another one I love is For the Love of Men by Liz Plank, and it talks about toxic masculinity, but it reframes it in a way where we're not saying masculinity is bad. We're just saying like masculinity should be intentional and thoughtful as to not like harm others or yourself. And I love that book. I thought it was so good. It's also a collection of essays. Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks for sharing all those books.
Yeah.
I mean, viewers, you got a lot to read now and catch up on. So tons of information. Yeah, and that was awesome. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah,
so
thanks
good.
For having me.
I love learning with you today. There's so many great pieces of information. Excited to watch this one back. Hopefully our viewers learned a bunch too today.
Yes.
They should. So maybe let's do this real quick. In the comments below, if you're whatever you're watching, maybe if you're watching this on YouTube, comment something you learned. Share with other people what
and
you learned.
And give me a book
how
recommendation too.
Yeah, throw your book recommendations too. How many books do you have read this year?
I think I'm somewhere around 90.
Sheesh.
Let me look.
90, wow.
You got to pick one
Mel
up.
says he hasn't read a book in a while.
In the same way social justice is small and incremental, so is reading.
True.
Read 10 pages a night, and all of a sudden, you'll have finished a book.
Yeah.
But you have to commit to reading every single day. I think that's the biggest thing is like reading is habit forming. I'm at 89.
89. Yeah. Okay. You'll get to 90 by the end of today.
My goal is 160 for the year.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. That's all we have for you today on Lean Into Leadership. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be right here, same time next week with another great episode. You're not going to want to miss it. For now, keep leading the way. Peace.
Thanks, y'all.